All right, returning to the stick figure example. So I've made a few modifications to the code, and you'll notice actually that I reverted back to the code that will allow the stick figures to be partially drawn even though they exceed the boundaries of the drawing area for this example. So I've made another modification in that I have another function which draws multiple stick figures. So I have a function called multiple stick figures which has 3 lines in it calling the stick girl function, which is going to draw a stick girl on the screen at different positions. How this works is I call this function down here. So this is the first line of code that's going to be executed. Actually, I guess it's the second line because the size function is the first line of code to be executed. But when we define the functions, we kind of skip over those, skip over the definitions of the functions. Nothing actually runs until we get down here. When I call this function, then this function starts running. And what does it do? It draws one girl, calls the function, calls the code up here to draw that figure on the screen. Then we come down here, we draw the second figure on the screen, which means that we go up here and we execute this code here to draw the figure on the screen, and then we draw the third figure on the screen. Okay, so what would happen? So I have 3 girls here, I have 3 lines of code. What would happen if I wanted to add another one? Well, I'd have to add another stick girl, call to stick girl function in some other position. And if I wanted to add another one, I put another line in, etc., etc. So if I wanted to fill this canvas with stick girl figures, I'd have to keep adding lines, adding lines, adding lines, adding lines. Okay, so first of all, let's change this code so that we draw a stick figure in a random position. So instead of specifying the positions for each of the girls on the screen, let's say when I run my program, I want the girls to be drawn in random positions. Okay, so how could I do that? Well, I can take these parameters, which are specifying the x and the y coordinates for the stick figure, and let's change those into random values. We talked about the random function in the last lesson. So the random function produces a floating point value between 0 and the number that I give it. So I'm going to specify the random number is going to go between 0 and the width of my canvas. Remember this processing built-in variable called width, which gives me the width of my window. And because this is a floating point value that I get from the random function, I change that to an integer. So this is going to give me a value between 0 and the width of my window. For the y coordinate, I'm going to specify this to be random height, giving me a value between 0 and the height of my window for the y value. So now if I want to draw multiple figures, all I have to do, I don't have to specify the values anymore. Of course, if I wanted them at specific places, this isn't going to work. So in order to get several girls on the screen now, I'm going to just put in several function calls with random values. So let's see what happens when I run this. Okay, so I'm getting more stick figures there. So now what I want to do is I want to draw 5 figures in this drawing window. So I want to draw exactly 5. This is where loops come in. So you'll notice that I'm putting the same line of code repeatedly over and over and over again. Okay, in order to draw another one, I put another line there. This is the place that we would use loops. So instead of adding more and more lines of code, I'm going to use a loop. So I'm going to say for I in range 4, whoops, not 40, for I in range 4, draw a stick figure. So now with one line of code here and one line of code here for the loop, I can draw 4 girls on the screen. Here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the code looks much neater and the work is being done by the computer. So now it's keeping track of the fact that I wanted to draw 4 figures on the screen. Before I had to keep track of that. I had to put 4 lines there to draw 4 stick figures. Now I can just put this loop and say, okay, I want to draw 4. What if I want to draw 40? Well, it's as simple as this. I don't need to put 40 lines calling the stick girl function. I just change my loop. So now I'm going to go from 0 to 39, which will draw 40 figures on the screen. Oh, how easy was that? Let's draw 400 on the screen. Whoa, 400 stick figures on the screen. And all I had to do was change the number of times that this loop iterates. So all I needed to do was change this value in the range function to say I want to draw more. Each time around this loop, I draw a stick girl at some random value. So some random X value and some random Y value. And then I come back up here to the for loop and I changes to the next value. So I is just keeping a counter and it's counting how many times this loop is going to run. So this is a very simple way to run the same code over and over and over again.